The forest had never been silent like this before. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as Julia knelt in the clearing, her knees pressed against the damp earth, her trembling hands hovering over the small broken body of the wolf cub. Blood matted its silver fur, and its shallow breaths came in painful gasps that tore at her heart. She had stumbled upon the scene, purely by accident, a young researcher lost in the Cascade Mountains, separated from her team during what was supposed to be a routine wildlife survey. The cub lay where it had fallen, victim to some territorial dispute or perhaps a bear attack, but it wasn't alone. Surrounding them in a perfect circle stood 7 wolves, each one massive and battle-scarred. Their eyes glowed amber in the fading twilight, and their lips curled back to reveal fangs that could crush bone. At the head of the pack stood the largest, a black wolf with a silver streak running down its spine. Even in his wolf form, Oscar radiated authority and ancient power. Julia's colleagues had warned her about the Nightshade pack. They were different from ordinary wolves. The locals whispered in taverns and around campfires. They were the old kind, the ones from stories. The ones who remembered when the world was younger and humans knew to fear the dark spaces between trees. "I'm sorry," Julia whispered to the cub, her voice cracking. "I'm so sorry this happened to you." The pack growled in unison, a sound that vibrated through the ground and into her bones. The black alpha soccer took a step forward, his massive paw silent despite his size. His eyes locked onto Julia's, and she saw something in them that made her breath catch. Intelligence, understanding, and beneath it all, an ocean of grief. The cub was his, she realized. His child, perhaps, or a younger sibling. The other wolves weren't just protecting their territory, they were standing vigil over one of their own. Julia had 2 choices. She could run, though she wouldn't make it 10 feet before they brought her down. Or she could do what her heart was screaming at her to do. Consequences be damned. She chose her heart. Slowly, deliberately, Julia removed her backpack and pulled out her first aid kit. The wolves' growls intensified, and she could feel their muscles coiling, ready to spring. But she didn't stop. With gentle hands, she began to examine the cub's injuries. "Puncture wounds," she murmured, more to calm herself than to communicate. "Possible internal bleeding, broken ribs." Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, pulling out gauze, antiseptic, her emergency suture kit. "I can help. Please, let me help." Oscar's growl dropped to a lower register, almost questioning. The other wolves looked to him, waiting for his command. One snap of his jaws, and Julia would be dead before she could scream. Instead, something impossible happened. Oscar shifted. The transformation was like watching water flow upward, defying gravity and reason. His form blurred and reformed, fur receding, bones restructuring, until a man stood before her. He was tall, with sharp features and eyes that still held that amber glow. His dark hair fell across his forehead, and despite his bare chest and the primal energy that radiated from him, there was something achingly human in his expression. "You would help him." Oscar's voice was rough, as if he hadn't spoken in his human form for a long time. "Even knowing what we are, even knowing we could kill you." Julia didn't look up from the cub. Her hands were already working, cleaning the wounds, applying pressure to stop the bleeding. "He's dying," she said simply. "Nothing else matters." For a long moment, Oscar watched her work. The other wolves remained in their animal forms, still poised to attack, but their postures had shifted slightly, watching, waiting. Julia worked through the golden hour and into twilight, her movements sure despite her shaking hands. She stitched and bandaged, administered what limited antibiotics she had, and fashioned a splint for the cub's broken leg from branches and strips of her own shirt. Through it all, Oscar crouched beside her, his presence both threatening and protective. Finally, when the stars had begun to emerge overhead, Julia sat back on her heels. The cub's breathing was stronger now, more regular. It wasn't out of danger, far from it, but it had a chance. "He needs rest," she said quietly, "and probably more help than I can give. But he might survive." Oscar reached out and placed one large hand on the cub's head, and Julia saw moisture gathering in his eyes. When he looked at her again, something had shifted in his expression. "What?" he asked, the single word carrying the weight of 1,000 questions. Julia thought about her answer. She thought about all the complex reasons: her training as a veterinary student, her love of animals, her inability to turn away from suffering. But in the end, she gave him the simple truth. "Because he deserves to live," she said, "and because anyone who loves him that much deserves to have hope." She leaned forward then, barely conscious of what she was doing, and pressed a gentle kiss to the cub's forehead. It was an instinctive gesture, the kind of comfort one offers to something small and hurt and precious. The sound of spears dropping echoed through the clearing. Julia looked up to find that the other wolves had also shifted. 6 men and women now stood in a circle around them, and each had let fall the weapons that had materialized during their transformation. They stared at her with expressions ranging from shock to something that looked almost like reverence. Oscar's hand covered hers where it rested on the cub's side. The old laws say that anyone who shows compassion to the youngest of the pack, even at risk to themselves, is marked by the moon, he said softly. You are under our protection now, Julia of the humans. For as long as you live, the Nightshade Pack is your family. Julia looked around at the faces surrounding her human now, but still wild, still dangerous, still other. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something warm unfurl in her chest. I'm going to hold you to that, she said, managing a trembling smile, because I'm coming back tomorrow to check on him. And the day after that, and the day after that. For the first time, Oscar smiled. It was a fierce expression, full of teeth and promise, but genuine nonetheless. We wouldn't expect anything less, he said. As the moon rose over the mountains and the cub's breathing steadied into the rhythm of sleep, Julia understood that her life had just changed forever. She had crossed a boundary that most humans never even glimpsed, and there would be no going back. But as Oscar helped her to her feet and the pack formed a protective escort to guide her safely back to the forest's edge, Julia found that she didn't want to go back. Sometimes, the most important discoveries aren't the ones you plan to make. Sometimes, they're the ones that find you in a clearing in the mountains, under a rising moon, when you choose compassion over fear. And sometimes, that choice changes everything.